As far as mainstream history will recognize, not including the sunken cities that they've found around the world, places like Göbekli Tepe, Nabta Playa, or Wurdi Yuang in Australia, these very, very ancient sites which date back over 10,000 years. Officially, there are only three like ancient civilizations that they will recognize, and we have Egypt, of course, famous for the pyramid. We have Sumeria, famous for the ziggurats there in southern Iraq, and we have the Indus Valley civilization in Pakistan on the Indus River. So they're basically the three civilizations recognized by the mainstream, and the official version is that roughly around 3000 BC, Egypt, Sumer, and Mohenjo-daro just sort of popped up out of the ground, completely independent of one another, and that they began with no connections, and that only centuries after they developed was there any trade or relevant or important communication between these three civilizations. However, by studying the weights and measures, we can discount that now because there's not a smoking gun piece of paper with an ISBN number to acknowledge this. It's no, let's not look at it. How again, through their units and systems of weights and measures and their temples, we can build a very, very strong case to show that either it's an extraordinary symphony of coincidence, just like the maths and the beauty of places such as the Great Pyramid, or there is indeed some very solid evidence to bring these civilizations together. So here we see the map again, and we have the Indus Valley civilization, famous by Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, the Sumerians and the ziggurats, for instance, which later become the Babylonians, Chaldeans, but Sumerians were at least the progenitor civilization and of that region. And again, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that but the Indus, Sumer, and Egypt have a common source, and this is one of the taboo subjects in regards to that. So here we just highlight, so we have Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus, and again, just popped up out of the ground all at the same time, beginning with some very advanced mathematics. For instance, recent work into clay tablets from Sumer and Babylon have shown that they had trigonometry, some very advanced trigonometry, and actually maybe superior because it's a more comfortable system. It doesn't require some of the more technical sides that much of our modern trig has. And again, yeah, Pythagorean theorem, 3, 4, 5 triangles, all this stuff that would really only be the credit given to the Greeks, some over 2,000 years after this period. Well, it does pop up in these places, and again, it's breaking the establishment mold. It's going to require the textbooks to be rewritten, reputations. So it's a very ancient history, just like modern history, is very politically dangerous. But we have these three civilizations. So, for instance, the Nama palette, that's okay. It's not the highest res there, but that's what's usually referred to as the beginning of Egyptian civilization, roughly around the year 3000 BC, when King Nama, or Mena, sometimes called as well, united the South and the North Kingdom, brought Upper and Lower Egypt and brought them together. Which is interesting because that would suggest that there was already two kingdoms before, and that there was presumably some sort of civilization before, but that just seems to be an arbitrary date because to push it back further is very problematic. Around about that same time, we had the beginning of Sumer with the famous Cuneiform Tablets, and of course they had some. So the earliest tablets from Sumer include business receipts, lists of inventory, quite complicated. You call them technical documents to show that it would be quite an advanced civilization because they're engaged in trade, they're writing lists, they're doing accountancy, they're doing some very important business dealings, and that this writing and geometry and mathematics would appear just the same. Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus. The Indus civilization, like famous for cities such as Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, is still very mysterious because we haven't decoded their writing. However, there's a lot of work out there in regards to how their symbols and writing actually seems to be appearing in other places around very far away places, including the Pacific. Similarities to the writing on Easter Island, but again, that's a very touchy subject. But at least as far as the establishment mainstream goes, they will recognise these three civilizations. Now, there are many other places, cities that are underwater, places like Göbekli Tepe, but it's taboo, not to talk, because it would break the mold of official history. So we have these three civilizations popping up all at the same time. Now, what I'm going to show, because this is a continuation of the first part, and where I was discussing pendulums, units of measure, and how they are in the Egyptian pyramids, such as famously the Great Pyramid and the Red Pyramid, and how the Great Pyramid, in the earlier videos, typically it's said to be scaled to the Earth at 43,200. I'll show you some more reasons why we need to break away from that, because that's based on 2D thinking. And if we use three-dimensional thinking, there is some amazing information that can be extracted from the pyramid using proportion and using these ancient systems of measure. So what we have is the Indus and Sumer, and just by coincidence, so we have the Sumerian or Royal Babylonian foot is identical to the Indus foot. So in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, we have this a standard street width of 33 feet, which would be 30 Indus feet. This foot is found much later, for instance, in the medieval period and up just before the Renaissance, at the time of Elizabeth I in England. It was called the Saxon foot. And the Saxon yard, or the Sumerian yard, or the Indus yard, 39.6 inches, or just shy of an exact metre. So we're just under 6 millimeters over the metre. Now I'm going to show how this is actually also embedded in the Great Pyramid, and again will extend and beyond that. I'm also going to show you how systems of weight also link Egypt and the Indus and the Babylonian, but that will be for later. But so we have the Sumerian foot is exactly the Indus foot, and again this will be called a sort of coincidence. However, this is an excellent example of them being engaged in trade, having standard weights and measures, sharing knowledge, sharing temple designs, temple plans. These are some of the earliest things that define a civilization: weights and measures, and temples and construction. However, so we also have, well, this will bring us directly to the Great Pyramid and also to the Egyptian royal cubit, as I showed earlier, based on a 1 metre pendulum, which is very close to this. However, the closeness is an exactness, and I'm going to explain why. Firstly, you want to have a recap of the pyramid as a scale model of the Earth, and as is said to be the ratio 43,200. And again, I'll put the link to the fuller video in the description. But now the pyramid itself is built on paving stones, and at the corners we also have something called the sockets. Now, to scale the pyramid to the Earth, firstly you need to include these. This is a very common mistake that's been repeated constantly. The pyramid itself is not scaled to the Earth at 43,200. It's the sockles and the sockets need to be included in that. However, as I've showed, and so I've gone through the measures, and just to explain, that will be the links in the description. There are lots of problems with the 43,200 scale, and there's a very simple, very elegant solution to this, and that is to stop viewing the pyramid as a two-dimensional triangle and a square, which it is not, because that eventually will only describes half the Earth, again, which is quite inelegant. And again, it's based on a two-dimensional view, one from the side, one from the top, and that's, well, the pyramid is not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional. And once we look at the pyramid as a pyramid and the Earth as a whole rather than a half, we can bring that out, and that's connected through time and the Egyptian royal cubit, which is universally recognized as a unit of measure at the pyramid. And so the whole 43,200 thing, the problem with it, the issues with it, can simply be solved by looking at the pyramid as a three-dimensional object. So standing at the northeast corner what we have is a scale model of the Earth at 86,400, as in 86,400 seconds per day, which is built on around this 1 metre pendulum, which itself defines the Egyptian royal cubit, which in itself is the unit of measure used on the Great Pyramid. Okay, so previously I showed that the pyramid viewed from the northwest corner creates the proportions of the Earth, including the socle and the sockets, at a scale of 86,400 to 1, which again relates to the pendulum, the metre, the second, and the cubit, which itself defines the pyramid. It feeds in on itself. Each corner of a pyramid represents something else, and so I've done some videos. I'll try to remember to put the links in the description, because there's a whole bunch of geometry, metrology, beautiful mathematics that emerges from doing the pyramid as a pyramid rather than a series of two-dimensional drawings. And so the northeast corner, and what is important about the northeast corner? Quite a bit. And so firstly, if we view the northeast corner here, and we see the proportion, and we need to include the socle, so once again we're using both the foundation and the pyramid, we create a ratio of 0.5235. So 0.5236. There are 0.5236 meters per cubit, which again feeds back into the second, feeds back into the 86,400. But it's also beautiful geometrically speaking, because that's the same ratio, pi over 6, which also describes a sphere inside a cube as a ratio of volume. Three-dimensional thinking once again. But also, if we take the cross-section and think of it two-dimensionally in that case as well, this same corner brings us a ratio of 1.27323, which is virtually indistinguishable from the ratio of area of a circle inside a square. Circle and square, sphere and cube. 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions, as well as a literal proportion built into the pyramid, which describes the ratio of the cubit, which comes from the 1 second pendulum. So meters, proportions, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, built on viewing the pyramid as a pyramid and viewing it as metrology, as measurement, but also as proportion. So back in part 1 of this series, just a recap. So we had the Egyptian royal cubit, which not only defines the Great Pyramid, but also defines the Red Pyramid at the shore, as we'll see in a moment. And the 1 second, as in 86,400 seconds per day, based on the meter connecting to this unit, which defines the structures themselves. And again, this is a very important point, that this, not only the second, the cubit, but how the meter operates together. And just again as a recap, we had evidence of, so it wasn't just the evidence in the pyramids themselves based on the physics of the pendulum, but also the capstone, which was destroyed, vandalized, but it was 1 meter high and 3 Egyptian royal cubits at the base, which I explained in part 1. But also the royal cubit at 0.5236 meters, connecting to some geometry, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional geometry, even the position of Heliopolis and the pyramid themselves. And again, that's even built into the proportions of the pyramid, again crossing from 2D to 3D via the square and the circle, the sphere and the cube. And of course, this is dependent on a 3-dimensional view of the pyramid, in taking into account the paving stones and the sockets at the corner. And once more, by looking at the pyramid as a pyramid and viewing it from a corner, and the northeast corner being the astronomical corner for a number of other reasons, which the videos will be in the description. But of course, the 86,400 seconds per day, the cubit, the second, the meter coming together to also create the proper proportions of the Great Pyramid to the size of the Earth. So we don't have the issues with the 432. We don't have to look at a side view and a top view. We're thinking of a 3-dimensional object, the pyramid, a 3-dimensional object, the globe, and not a half globe but a full globe. And so now we have solved the issues. It's much more elegant. But not only is it more elegant than 432, it also will deliver to a whole bunch of other connections and knowledge, and that includes the Sumerian and Indus cultures as well, and we'll have a look at that now. Okay, as we saw earlier, both Sumer and the Indus were working off a foot of 13.2 inches, or a yard, 3 feet per yard, would have been 39.6 or 1.00584 meters. How does that connect to the Egyptian royal cubit? Well, of course, the cubit is based on a meter, but the wand, as it's sometimes called, the Saxon wand, or the 3 feet of the Sumerian plus the Indus plus the Saxon feet, or 3 of each, that will not bring us exactly through the pendulum to the Egyptian royal cubit as used, of course, in the shore and the Great Pyramid itself. But if we do a comparison, so on the left hand side I have the modern meter and the pendulum, creating a 1 second clock as well, 86,400 seconds per day, 0.5236 meters. Now pendulums work day and night, so there's this bit of thing, well, it's the night and the day. There's no evidence of that. The pendulums work. People understood the full cycle of time. And of course, on the right hand side we have the 1.00584, so just short of 6 millimeters, which is a pendulum based on 3 Indus or 3 Sumerian feet, and therefore the arc is ever so slightly larger. Instead of 0.5236 meters, it's 0.52665 meters. An Egyptian cubit plus 3 millimeters, or basically the width of a grain of rice. Now, as with these things, it's not good to round them off. The difference is actually very important. It's actually key, and because this will also relate to the scale of the pyramid, to the size of the Earth at 86,400, which of course we have to incorporate the sockets at the corner, and we had to look at the pyramid as a 3D pyramid from the corner. But now let's look. So the scaling of the Earth of the Great Pyramid was on the north corner, and now we're on the northwest corner, and now we're on the northeast corner. And again, we're going to include the sockets, and what we have, so we have the base length there on either side, which gives us an average of 231.6.762 meters. Now let's look at the Sumerian or the Indus royal cubit, which is 3 millimeters longer. So the base of the pyramid itself is 440 Egyptian royal cubits. If we multiply this pendulum and this cubit created by the Sumerian and the Indus scale, what do we have? 231.7289 meters. So within margins of error, we're talking 2 centimeters on each side, and of course the sockets is, well, we're well within the acceptable margins of error there, and so the Indus cubit or the Sumerian pendulum cubit actually describes the sockets. The sockets of the Great Pyramid describe the size of the Earth. Each corner of the Great Pyramid describes something else. So we had that 2D and 3D geometry which emerges from this northeast corner. This northeast corner also encodes the 0.5236 proportion of the Egyptian royal cubit itself, and we also have the point where the Sumerian and the Indus scales connect together. So what we have is some very strong evidence here, but however you might say, well, this is still not, this is coincidence, it's not evidence of older connections between Indus and Sumer to, well, the Great Pyramid and to Egypt. Well, there's more to come. Now there of course is more evidence, but we do know what the Mohenjo-Daro or the Indus foot was, the Sumer foot, and we find in Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa it's one of the standard street width, and well, it's so 33 feet as we call it, or 30 Indus feet. However, we also find it in many important places in Egypt. The enclosing walls at Saqqara, the Wall of the Crow, 33 feet or 30 Indus foot. But you'll also find it on the Giza Plateau itself. So the Khafre Pyramid, the one still with the peak on the top, 33 feet above the Great Pyramid, and also a 33 feet wide terrace. But even at Abu Simbel, the little Abu Simbel, the statues are 33 feet or 30 Indus feet. The larger statues 66 or twice that. Okay, so what we have is connections between Egypt, Sumer and the Indus by measurement. But let's, for the moment, for argument's sake, let's call them coincidence. So what we have is a connection between the pendulum, time, the, the pendulum as a unit of, as a device of measuring time, which connects to units of measure of length, such as the metre, the cubit, and the Indus scale or Sumerian scale, coming back together to also describe the sockets at the corner, which is so relevant, so important to the Great Pyramid, and explaining the ratio of the pyramid size to the size of the Earth based on 86,400 using three-dimensional thinking rather than two-dimensional thinking, and how this starts to connect one bit to the other to start to explain so much more. And that's why this 86,400 second scale is so important, because it's going to connect to many other facets, and through weights and measures, Thoth, the wisdom of Thoth, sorry, and the units of weight and measure. So we've connected through measures of length to bring time and proportion and so many other elements, a lot more to come. But what does weight have to do with this scheme? Can we also connect these societies through weights? Well, absolutely we can, because the Indus Valley, lots of weights have been left and found, and they build on a scale of 13.66, 27.33 grams, and that is exactly the same scale that they were using in Old Kingdom Egypt. Now the Sumerians also connections, I'm going to put link in the description, I'll go into that in more detail in the future, but this would also incorporate the Sumerian system of weights as well, because the Egyptian copper deben, 27.3 grams. The Egyptian gold deben, half of that, 13.6 grams. Exactly the same as the Indus Valley scale. So we have connections with measure, we have connections with weights, and that those measures so wonderfully connect to the Great Pyramid itself through the pendulum, through these multiple schemes, and this will also incorporate much more knowledge. For instance, the Sumerian Epic of Gilgamesh, and in the future, in the next episodes, we'll be going into more detail, because 86,400 or 864 and this 27.3 scale is vitally important, and it is actually connected by pi, and that pi of course is embedded in the Great Pyramid itself. So the Great Pyramid and pi, it's been covered for quite a while. I've done some videos framing the already existing research, adding some of my own, but I'll also be showing how pi connects firstly to the 86,400 scaling of the Great Pyramid to the Earth, but will also connect us through this very special number of 27.3. We've already seen how the Sumerian and the Indus scales, I'll put some links in the description that have the sources and lots more information if you want to go more in depth. But we see both weights and measures connecting. Previous episode I talked a little bit about the capstone found near the Red Pyramid, how it was 1 metre high, and how under the care of this man it was essentially destroyed. Let's be blunt. But also how showed with some geometry how using the supposed modern metric, very easy, creating the vesica, we could create that 3 Egyptian royal miles. But also the radius of those circles, being a quarter metre, is 0.2734 yards. Well, from the vesica, it's 273 is embedded in there as well. It's very important. And of course the 1 metre pendulum, which just by extension from the earlier diagram, but the 0.2734 yards appears again. Well, it's embedded in pi as well, and well, the number 4 and how that connects, especially with Hermetic secrets, but 1.273 or 27.3% as well. And again, three-dimensional thinking, instead of the two-dimensional diagram which gives us half pi, if we look at the pyramid as a solid, we get a pi ratio or very close to it. But if we then use that same method and use the most exact survey methods, we find that it is not only in proportion but also in by the meters, by the measures. It is also incorporating some very important, very lovely knowledge of pi, both in the proportion viewed as 3D, but also, of course, in the measurements. And this three-dimensional view on the pyramid also delivers us back to this 440 pendulum of the Indus royal cubit, 2 and 3-dimensional geometry, and of course the 86,400 scaling of the Earth, which connects us to the cubit, to the metre, and the second, and again this much more elegant way of a three-dimensional object, and should be observed as such using the most accurate measures available. But 273, so even in the angle, so like a circle inside of a square, the area, well, it's 27.3% larger, and that's the same proportion incorporated in the pyramid, which also beautifully describes the proportion of the moon to the earth. And here there is some very, very deep, very it's a textbook in stone of a Great Pyramid, and they're showing us a whole bunch of data. So for instance, we have the scaling of the earth, we have the scaling of the moon to the earth. Well, the moon orbits the earth in relation to a star once every 27.3 days. That is called a sidereal month. It's also very closely connected to, for instance, the gestation of infants, and even the every 28th day, every 27.3 days, we have the menstrual cycle. But during that time, because of elliptical orbit, it shifts slightly, but during that time, the Earth will regularly pass through 27.3 degrees of its orbit, which is also interesting because sunspots tend to appear 27.3 degrees latitude north or south. However, observed from the Earth, the sunspot, or the rotation speed of the sun, is 27.3 days. Whole bunch of more stuff coming. I'm going to blend all this together back with 864, pi, and 273. Just really the tip of the iceberg what we're looking at now. And earlier, again, I mentioned the other units of measure embedded in ancient structures, such as the Parthenon, which includes the allegedly modern English foot being used over 2,500 years ago, and how just like the Salamis stone, just like the capstone at the pyramid, these temples are temples of measurement. They're incorporating these beautiful numbers, and using that Doric method, well, what do we get? The height of the pyramid is 27.33 Doric rods. I have some more information which I will present into that, because whether they were using rods or not, well, I have some evidence for that. But of course the Parthenon not only reflects, well, it also reflects this number in measurement, but of course the proportions emerge from that as well. I did a whole series on the Salamis stone, the Parthenon, ancient Indian temples as well. But the ancient Greek world, they were also using an ounce of 27.3 grams, just like the Indus, just like the Egyptians. It's part of this ancient legacy of weights and measures. And the American silver dollar, 27.3 grams, or 8 cob. If you've heard the expression 2 bits to describe a quarter dollar, well, pirates in the old days would cut their coins into 8 bits, 2 bits being 1 quarter. That's where it comes from. 27.3 and 8 are connected. Well, still to this day, embedded in plain sight, just shifting around. And so the 50p piece in the UK, 27.3 millimeter diameter, but weighs 8 grains. They've the same numbers, just embedded around you. I've found this in so many places, and well, it's quite amazing. And again, this is measurable. It's testable whether it was by design and stuff. We'll have a look at that. Also, you might remember a few years back, this image was going around. This is not an honest image. It's photoshopped. However, the date, every 2,737 years, give or take, this comes out. So what I did was overlay this image on top of the Giza pyramids, and we find that it matches very, very beautifully. And not only that, we have Mercury, Venus and Saturn, and these of course will link to 864 and 27.3. And again, I've done some videos on Bode's law, how this geometry, this beautiful geometry, explains the distances between the planets. Earth being 1 or 1 AU, well, Mercury to Venus is 0.273 AU, 27.3% the distance from the Earth to the Sun. 27.3% also incorporates Venus to the Earth. And we have Saturn And amongst other things which I'll discuss, I showed earlier how these all connect to 86,400, for instance. Well, it's tilted at 27.3 degrees. Now, the pyramid and these older structures are temples of knowledge, textbooks of stone, beautiful, wonderful things, and this these details here don't require elaborate lost high technology. They only require understanding of technology as it existed prior to the Industrial Revolution. Through the quadrant, through the cross staff, we were able to make these observations and take these measurements. So if yeah, you don't need high-tech computers and mechanical observations to do this. Astronomers have been doing it for ages, and the technology they had in the 14th, 15th, 16th century was essentially no different from what it was in antiquity. The only missing element is a telescope, and we know that they were making glass back in the day. Now here's some examples. There's even a clay tablet describing the chemical process to make glass, but of course they didn't necessarily need to, because there is an abundance of glass in that part of the world. The only technology now would be learning how to shape it and learning some of the optics. But considering their skill in craftsmanship, if you just look at their skill, they would the equals at least of the Renaissance and these other periods where they did develop a telescope. So a telescope is not some high advanced technology. It just took a few little pieces together, and with a quadrant, with a cross staff, with a pendulum to measure time, we can make all these observations. Hi, so this is just the tip of the iceberg. In follow-ups I'll be adding a lot more as well, but please check out the links in the description, because there'll also be information relevant to the Mesopotamian Sumerian weight systems and how they actually do correspond to the Indus scale. I just didn't want to go into the minutiae of that for this particular video. There'll also be some other really cool, interesting stuff if you want to go further, but all we need is the 7 liberal arts, especially the Quadrivium, the master stonemasons tricks of those times as well to build. Because unfortunately it's a fashion, it's become a business to talk lost high technology and to project all sorts of to be frank, absolute nonsense onto these things. We're projecting what our modern world onto a completely different time where it was so different, and we're viewing it through eyes that we want to see it with. And even people are saying that the caduceus is a DNA spiral, and if they didn't tell you what the actual history of the caduceus is, you might be inclined to believe that. But the history is very clear. The people saying that obviously haven't done their research, or don't want to do their research. They would rather promote bunkum like this, because again it's become a fashion, it's become a business, and it's like one of those trends that goes on YouTube. Someone sort of sees what's popular and then they turn it into an infomercial and do that whole popularity bad acting infomercial stuff, and it really is a shame. They're doing a great disservice to those people they claim to be in support of. So the trivium and the quadrivium, geometry, music, arithmetic and astronomy. Not so long, only a few centuries ago, people were making these excellent types of observations using very primitive tools, exact same tools that were available, were being used in the times of ancient Egypt, Sumer and Mohenjo-Daro. And again, there'll be more information, because the question is, well, obviously the Sumerians, the Indus and the Egyptians at the very least were in trade with one another, because they had standard weights and measures. You don't accidentally come to 27.3 grams or to these pendulum scales which describe not just the Great Pyramid but so many other temples. So obviously they were in contact. I don't, because I don't have a time machine, I cannot check, but I'm inclined to believe that all of these civilizations were actually the descendants of an older stream of knowledge, an older civilization who incorporated these very important astronomical, musical, geometry and arithmetic numbers into their instruments of measure, but also, more importantly, into their temples, so they become textbooks in stone written for the ages, so this knowledge would not be lost. Only once reasoned and measure come back into it, they could be uncovered once more. But anyway, with that, hope you enjoy. Please click like, share, comment, however you feel. And as a final note, just a tip of a hat to G. If he's watching, he knows who he's talking about. Mind-blowing stuff, brother. You're really onto something. And with that, cheers, and see you for the next episode.